Good day, I'm Junior Researcher Adam Southgate, and today will be an overall recap of the events that took place with the Perpetual Tear Incident. Firstly, however, I'd like to mention that we now have a Discord to help keep our hunters organized. We've broken it up into different roles based on rank and which earth you belong to, if any. Along with this, in future we will be coordinating smaller contracts through this system for real-time communication while you hunt. I'll leave a link for it in the description of this video along with the channel's overall description. I hope to see you all there in the near future. Right, to begin at the logical point, a year ago a breach opened in Snowdonia National Park that failed to close. This is highly unusual as typically they deposit an entity and immediately shut. However, this one didn't. We conducted a series of missions through this breach exploring the subsphere on the other side until we were forced to retreat, sealing our end with a containment cell built around the breach. The cell was monitored with no activity for some time until eye-like growths began pouring through and into the cell. The pressure built to the point where the cell exploded, damaging the base built around it and killing a great many staff members. Hunter 23 She Living, who was acting as temporary security at the time, managed to set up a secondary line of defense further back from the breach. However, the odds were that the strange growths of the subsphere would eventually begin to spread into our own. This left us in a difficult position, but we did have some options. Firstly, we could have attempted to erect a large tented dome around the zone. This could have stopped the growths from spreading to the wider area. It would have been a large undertaking, however, possibly would have been safer overall. Secondly, we could have attempted to take back our side of the breach with a rapid assault, as the Homo floresiensis had already begun to pour through. These were diminutive human-like creatures, very similar to our own distant cousins, however completely infested with the eye-like growths that controlled their movements. This was the most dangerous option, however, if successful, would have given us control over the situation in a shorter time frame than any other. Finally, thanks to the Admiral 1234 and his organization, we were given access to a cache of, let's say, morally dubious weaponry. These weapons were far more destructive than what we typically use, however, also held some downsides for the user. We knew that the Admiral 1234's organization had been experimenting with infusing more modern weaponry with different magics, creating new artifacts with all the upsides and downsides that entails. This option would have meant maintaining the defense around the tear at the same level, while a team was dispatched to collect the weaponry. Those dispatched would also need to expect some anomalous defenses at the site. The decision was eventually reached by our hunters to split into two teams. The first would defend the support staff while they constructed the tented dome, while the second team would attempt to breach the supply cache offered to us by the Admiral 1234. It was shortly after work began on the large structure that the Homo floresiensis assaulted our position, attempting to smash through our defensive line. The battle was fierce, with tons of ammunition spent, however the Horde continued to pound against our defenders. This caused a worrying issue. The bodies of the hive-minded diminutive people were beginning to pile up into a wall-like structure that was starting to block our hunters' view, meaning that they could only get a clear shot on those clambering over the bodies, increasing the size of the hill. The situation at the cache was not much better. While opening the bunker was made easy due to the Admiral 1234 giving us access, it appeared that we were not the only ones interested in it. The team sent to retrieve the armaments were faced with a rather disquieting sight. Seeming to have grown up through the concrete was a fleshy collection of roots that also bear the same eye-like growths that the infected Homo floresiensis did. This revelation that the subsphere had already begun to infect our own was incredibly troubling and forced us to reassess. Entrance to the cache was next to impossible with the matter being so thick, and with the infection spreading beneath the earth, the dome had become irrelevant. The Admiral 1234 had assigned some of his own men to continue the effort in breaking into the bunker while our men returned to the greater defense. The truth was, we needed to establish a new strategy going forward. We could have attempted to take our side of the breach in hopes we could stop further infection. However, it may have been simply too late for this to make a difference. We could have focused on containing the spread, while our researchers attempted to discover more about the hive mind, hopefully finding an exploitable weakness. This approach would have meant having to rapidly deploy to any area where the fleshy roots broke ground in order to destroy them. At the urging of Hunter 23 She Living as well as other hunters, it was decided that they would halt their ground against the waves of infected Homo floresiensis long enough for the research teams to discover a weakness. However, with the bodies mounting ever higher, blocking the view of the hunters, the defensive line needed to be moved back to create a clear firing line once again. The new line, 30 meters back from the previous, was difficult to reach as the number of infected entities clambering over the hill of bodies only increased. Those who had already reached the line covered those who were yet to arrive as best as they could. However, some hunters witnessed, despite their best efforts, 3 of their own dragged screaming to the other side of the corpse wall. Meanwhile, at the same time, the Admiral 1234 sent a small team to investigate his supply bunker. The team found that the countermeasures had been destroyed due to the roots breaking through the wiring as they passed through the concrete structure, leaving them useless. Thankfully, this team also discovered that the roots were somewhat susceptible to salt of all things. While not outright killed by it, they seemed to almost pull away from it, though it was a slow process. With enough time, they believed that they could reach and retrieve the supply of anomalous weaponry. At the same time, numerous reports came in of massive, bulb-like fleshy growths emerging from the ground outside of the containment area up to 3 miles away. While our hunters were containing the roots, this was altogether different. Up to this point, the bulbs had not done anything. However, we did not know their purpose, and initial examinations of them showed that they held immense pressure within them that was slowly increasing. We could have sent a team to escort our researchers to these growths, so that we could gain a better idea of what they were. However, with manpower at the time being rather thin, it would have removed the possibility of creating a more robust defense around the breach itself. The line held, but the same issues that forced the first one to fall back had begun to occur once again, that of the infected Homo floresiensis bodies piling so high that a literal wall had begun to form, blocking the hunter's view. Luckily, in this case, after their successful mission to the Bone Exchange, Freelance Hunter, the Slumbering Sanctuary, and his teammates Sam and Maiko had managed to acquire a large supply of the odd capsules containing E Umbra D. The plan they put forward was to set up a wall of light that would protect our hunters and then throw the capsules at the Perpetual Tear so that the E Umbra D would assault the Homo floresiensis. Once they had been dealt with, we could then close the lights in a ring formation, returning the E Umbra D to a benign state. This would have required all available hunters to enact in order to create a ring of suitable size while also containing the Homo floresiensis, who would also be attempting to escape. It would have also had the downside of each Homo floresiensis becoming a new instance of E Umbra D. The Admiral 1234 also proposed his own plan. He had promised to aid our cause in the form of 268 men, all of which he claimed to be elite units. As we have witnessed before, his artifact-enhanced men were, as standard, stronger and quicker than we mundane humans, so the elite of these had to be something special. With these reinforcements, he argued that it may be possible to simply retake our side of the breach through conventional means. However, all would be needed in order to make this push. The research teams also, surprisingly, put forward their own proposal. After being escorted by our hunters to the bulbs, they had uncovered some alarming information. Within each of the bulbs were thousands of the eye-like growths, which when attached to living matter incorporate that being into the hive mind. The researchers' plan hinged on what the Admiral 1234's men had discovered at the supply bunker, that of the effect salt seems to have on these beings. As stated, the effect was slow, hence why the weapons were yet to be reached. However, our researchers theorized that a high sodium concentrate saline solution injected directly into the plant-like organisms in enough volume could cause them to wither. If this could be done in time and the researchers' theories were correct, we may have been able to stop the bulbs from bursting and spreading their eye-like growths over the area. The issue we ran into is that each approach would take considerable manpower to achieve, so we needed to fully commit to one of the three plans. Before we go any further, I do have a video to show you recorded by one of our gamekeepers who were scouting around the area during the time of the event. With the decision split between an all-out assault on the breach and using the Umbra D capsules, the decision was made to combine the plans. Firstly, a ring of light was created around the breach, following the line of our defense, using floodlights. Secondly, the Umbra D capsules were thrown en masse towards the breach itself, unleashing the entities within, which quickly began attacking the infected Homo floresiensis en masse, converting them into more of themselves. Thirdly, with the Admiral 1234's men acting as walking firing support, the ring was slowly closed. The fighting was extreme, as the Homo floresiensis both threw themselves at our assault while others attempted in vain to kill the Umbra D. The plan was working as intended, however, with the ring closing on the breach. Many of our hunters managed to get close enough to it to see fleshy roots hanging from the breach itself and entering the ground below. The explosion that rang out across the area, however, complicated things immensely. One of the large bulbs had burst open, firing the eye-like growths high into the air. Thankfully, they only fell far enough to cover a 10-mile radius. However, much of the life within that zone became infected and linked to the hive mind. Our hunters at the breach received warning just in time and were able to retreat, taking cover beneath the partially constructed dome that was originally meant to seal in the subsphere but instead acted to keep our people from being rained down upon. Many brave hunters remained under the open air, giving the others time to fall back by defending the floodlights from the infected, keeping the Umbra D trapped within the ring for as long as possible. The battle between the two forces continued until morning, when the sunlight eliminated the Umbra D. Our hunters who remained to protect those retreating became infected and joined the hive mind. Our researchers believed that whatever was controlling the beings from the subsphere recognized the encroaching danger and expelled the eye-like growths early as a deterrent, as they surmised that they could be thrown much further, and so the bulb had burst early. The Admiral 1234's men had managed to retrieve the supply of artifact weaponry from the cache. The total count was 33 arms in all, as many were destroyed by the roots. However, they would hopefully be a big help. At the same time, our researchers discovered that the same high sodium solution applied to the skin would stop the growth from attaching, which gave us some defense. They also theorized that if the roots hanging from the breach were cut, it may have caused all the other roots and bulbs to wither and die. All the plant-like organisms were connected to each other via the same root system, which began at the breach, and so it was a good bet. The infected Homo floresiensis and the infected hunters had ceased their attack, and appeared to have switched their focus to defending the breach itself. This left us with two options. Firstly, we could have eliminated the remaining 3 bulbs before they burst. They were guarded by large groups of infected civilians and a menagerie of wildlife, and so it would take significant force to get close enough to use the solution. Secondly, a final push through the center towards the breach, with the sole aim of cutting the umbilical roots, as our researchers had come to call them. From what we had seen up to this point, those within the hive mind would, in all likelihood, fight desperately to stop us achieving this. With things being so dire, we decided to refocus our efforts on the remaining bulbs before they reached the critical point and expelled the eye-like growths. The 3 remaining were codenamed as Azalea, Begonia, and Camellia. Our remaining hunters, along with the survivors of the Admiral 1234's men, were split into 4 separate teams. Firstly, the Home Guard, whose primary responsibility was to hold the defensive line against the infected hunters and Homo floresiensis, who our researchers surmised would attempt a brutal assault once they worked out we were attacking the bulbs. Secondly, Team Gardner, who would assault Azalea. The bulb they were after had emerged from the side of a sharp cliff, and as such was difficult to reach, but was not covered by defenders due to the terrain. Thirdly, Team Groundskeeper, who would assault Begonia. Begonia had emerged amongst a dense forest, complicating the assault as the bulb was covered by a large collection of animal life that had been brought into the hive mind. Finally, Team Horticulturalist, who would be attacking bulb Camellia. Unfortunately, this bulb had appeared within a populated town, and those within had been caught in the blast from the first bulb's expulsion, meaning that Camellia was protected by a large contingent of infected human civilians. It was decided that all 3 assaults would begin simultaneously, as to not give the hive mind time to react and move forces to give extra cover to each bulb. Team Gardner, despite the difficult terrain, had the easiest time of it. Due to the bulb's location, it was impossible for the researchers to administer the solution in great enough quantities to kill it, so the team landed on an altogether more radical plan. A few of the hunters volunteered to scale the side of the cliff, carrying with them both a small amount of the solution and an explosive device. The theory was that once the bulb had been injected with the saline, it would go into involuntary contraction, stopping it from releasing. This would not be enough to kill it, but once it was achieved, the explosives would be detonated at its base, causing it to separate from the root system and the cliff wall. The plan was working as intended, however the contractions were more violent than was theorized, with the sides of the bulb splitting, pouring out a number of the eyes. While the team themselves were protected, they did not wish to risk the bulb bursting, and so they detonated the explosives while they were still beneath the bulb, taking their lives but detaching Azalea. Team Groundskeeper, faced with a forest filled with infected animals, had a more traditional fight. The team moved in tight squads towards the bulb from different sides in order to split the hive mind's attention, with the researchers carrying the solution at the center of each squad. Each was assailed by scores of infected deer and cattle that had been pulled in from nearby farms. These animals, with their vast bulk, continued their charge even after being riddled with gunfire, tons of enraged flesh falling upon the hunters. Of the 6 squads that made up Team Groundskeeper, only 3 made it to the rendezvous, however luckily with enough solution to complete the mission. Once back together, the remaining hunters circled around the researchers who began administering the solution to bulb Begonia. The fighting became even more fierce as the remaining animals all descended upon them. However, by the time the last hunter fell, the bulb had already begun to wither. Team Horticulturalist, who needed to enter a town populated by infected civilians, decided on an altogether stealthier approach. Utilizing the town's sewer system, the team surmised that they may possibly be able to reach the base of bulb Camellia without the hive mind's notice, and administer the solution without ever being seen. The plan was going well, with the team reaching the base of Camellia and beginning to inject the saline. However, the hive mind quickly deduced what was happening after the bulb began to contract. Hundreds of infected civilians poured into the tunnels and raced towards Team Horticulturalist, but thankfully with the narrow quarters this became a choke point. The hunters opened fire, raining rounds into the horde, causing the bodies to pile up, which blocked the tunnel. with the last of the solution administered, Team Horticulturalist extracted from the location. Lastly, Team Home Guard faced their own challenges as the infected Homo floresiensis renewed their assault against our lines, but in the time between the last assault we had reinforced our defense. Security staff had joined the team, and with them temporary fortifications were quickly constructed, giving our hunters raised firing positions in which to rain down upon the enemy. Even so, the battle was exhausting, with hundreds of thousands of rounds fired as the hive mind tried desperately to break through, but in the end, Team Home Guard held their ground until their assault faltered. We were left with two ways forward. Either way, we would need to retake our side of the breach and cut the umbilical roots hanging from it, but it was after that concerned us. We could have simply sealed our side as we did before, however this time with new material synthesized from Abomination chitin, or we could have sent a bomb through the breach. This would have cleared a substantial area on the other side, which we would then take, setting up a fortified base, opening up opportunities to find a way to end this problem once and for all. Our own hunters, the Admiral 1234's soldiers, and of course Freelance Hunter, the Slumbering Sanctuary, and their team all participated in the push. The hive mind, in the time we were preparing for the assault, had constructed defenses of its own, specifically using the still living bodies of infected Homo floresiensis. They had linked their arms and legs together, creating a wall 5 bodies thick and 4 bodies high. Those at the base had quickly died due to the weight not allowing them to draw air into their lungs, while those at the top still grasped outward in order to snare any attempting to clamber over. They had used the same method to create ramps on their side of the wall, allowing more of themselves to pour over to attack our forces. Due to this defense, a spearhead tactic was implemented to focus our efforts on a single section of the wall where an explosive would be placed in order to open a breach. The Admiral 1234's men, due to their experience with such equipment, were equipped with the recovered artifact weaponry and would act as the defense for the push, knocking back the enemy's counterattack. Hunter and Pro-Burb official would head up the spear tip, commanding a squad of 20 hunters who would cut their way towards the wall. Hunter 23 She Living would command the core of the assault, both defending and transporting the explosive, while also aiding the Admiral 1234's men with fire support. Finally, Freelance Hunter, the Slumbering Sanctuary, and their team would act as the spear shaft, providing anomalous support throughout the engagement. The assault would need to pass over 2 artificial hills created from the bodies of infected Homo floresiensis who had fallen during their assault against us, which created a significant obstacle. The beginning of the assault was described as eerily silent, possibly due to the piled bodies blocking the view of the hive mind. No counterattack was forthcoming. That was until Pro-Burb official and their men crested the hill. The side of the hill blocked from our sight until we began walking down it suddenly came alive. Small grasping hands exploded out, gripping a hunter's legs with unnatural strength. Hunter and Pro-Burb official and their men quickly began firing and stabbing down into the writhing mass beneath them, attempting to free themselves. However, at the same time, a new wave exploded from behind the second wall. It was Freelance Hunter, the Slumbering Sanctuary's man, Sam, who turned the situation around. Using his necromantic affinities, he quickly pushed benign spirits into the bodies of the dead Homo floresiensis who were mixed with the still living ones. The moving ground beneath the hunter's feet began fighting against itself, and the grip was loosened on Pro-Burb official and their men. Pro-Burb official leapt from the side of the hill and onto solid ground, where they began firing at the rapidly approaching Homo floresiensis, their men quickly following. Sam, having rapidly depleted his strength, was evacuated to safety, while the Admiral 1234's men raced to the top of the first hill to provide fire support. Hunter 23 She Living, thinking quickly, called for a large section of the defensive dome to be brought to the wall, specifically the fabric. They ordered their men to lay the sheeting over the hill as they climbed, removing the chance of them being grabbed as they marched. Reaching the base of the second hill, under constant assault by the Homo floresiensis, it was quickly decided that a repeat of what had happened at the first was best avoided. The slumbering sanctuary and Maiko offered an alternative to the grueling ascent and descent. Both moved to the center, joining 23 She Living within the core of the assault, and each began to chant. Hunters witnessed as two trees began to grow through the hill of bodies. On the left, a strong and wizened oak, and on the right, a majestic cherry blossom. Both trees intertwined and merged, leaving between them a tunnel large enough for 3 men to walk side by side. Both hybrids collapsed under the strain, but a path was laid open. The Homo floresiensis attempted to charge through this new gap. However, they found their way blocked by a barrier they could not see. Amproburb official and their men rushed through the gap, weapons firing forth like dragon fire. The rapid push knocked the hive mind back long enough for the Admiral 1234's men to seize the initiative and reinforce the new position. With the way to the wall opened by their fellow hunters, 23 She Living and their men carried the explosive device, approaching the wriggling structure, the last obstacle between the hunters and the breach. 23 She Living ordered their men to set the charges while they fired at those still moving within the wall, grasping hands reaching out constantly, trying to grab and pull those setting the charges into the structure. With the explosives set, the hunters fell back to the opposite side of the trees, all the time firing at the relentless Homo floresiensis who never once stopped attacking. With ammunition running short, the hunters drew swords, hammers, mauls, and spears as the explosives detonated, shaking the ground and sending pieces of small bodies high into the air. Realizing it had been breached, the others still living that made up the wall joined the attack against the hunters. What had started as a slow, methodical advance devolved into a mad melee as hunters tried to defend themselves but also reach the umbilical roots. From multiple reports, we know that it was Hunter 23 She Living who finally reached the breach after their sword worn from combat had failed, but seeing an open path to the roots, they drew a small, unassuming dagger and charged through the horde of grasping hands and gnashing teeth. To the other hunters, it was as if the Homo floresiensis simply and suddenly switched off, falling to the ground, limp and unaware. Those few infected hunters suddenly regained themselves, falling to the floor in wails and sobs of relief. Hunter 23 She Living was found bleeding heavily from multiple bite wounds, but still breathing, laying beneath the breach, dagger in one hand and cut root in the other. Those who participated in the assault were moved to different Order hospital wings, as there was not one amongst them who left the engagement unscathed. The Admiral 1234's men were treated and then released to rejoin their group. While it was standard practice for patients to be unarmed in Order hospital facilities, an exception was made in their case due to their reliance upon their equipment. Hunter and Proburb officials suffered rather a nasty broken arm after they were grabbed by 3 different Homo floresiensis who pulled in separate directions. Despite this, though, they fought on, one-handing a maul and crushing those responsible. Thankfully, a Pinocchio prosthetic was not needed and the bone was set. It should only be a few weeks before they are fully recovered. Freelance Hunter, the Slumbering Sanctuary, and their team, after rather an extensive outpouring of their anomalous abilities, thankfully were unharmed, however rather depleted. Each required several days of observation and rest, however we did manage to make sure that they all shared a ward. Finally, Hunter 23 She Living was moved to intensive care, where they have already started a series of surgeries that will hopefully secure their recovery. While it is too early to say for definite, it does look as if there is reason to be hopeful that they will eventually return to active duty. As for the breach itself, those who were intentionally kept from the battle have since sent a large-scale explosive through and after its detonation have gone through to establish a beachhead for ourselves. So far, the hive mind has maintained a distance from the breach on their side, allowing our teams to construct a more fortified and covered position. We will need to wait to see how this situation develops. And there we go. I'd like to thank all the hunters who participated in this contract for their diligence and their part in turning the tide. Together they stood against the relentless waves and made the ocean break. You should all be proud. With Arthur's might and Merlin's wisdom, thank you.